Tannenberg Eastern Front, a World War I first-person shooter, has just had its console release, available on both Xbox and PlayStation now, having previously been released on PC, and coming at a time to console when the AAA behemoth of this genre of game, Battlefield, is in a substantially weakened state, opening the door for games such as Tannenberg to increase their market share and get your attention, potentially. So is this the Battlefield replacement that some of you have been waiting for? Will this scratch the World War I itch for others of you out there, or is this overall a great first-person shooter experience? Well, I've played 5 hours of Tannenberg on console, so today I'll help you to decide if it's worth your time. This is Tannenberg. Now quickly before we get into this, I am on the hunt for 50k subscribers, currently at 48k, so if you're new here or haven't subscribed before, doing so would be massively appreciated. If you want to see more content from me, thank you very much. So, I spent my 5 hours on Tannenberg on Xbox One X, making use of the enhanced experience Tannenberg offers for the later versions of this console generation, although I couldn't tell how it was enhanced to be completely honest with you, and this was on the first day of console release. It cost me around £15, and if you want the TLDR of my opinion straight away, this is the worst FPS game I can ever remember playing. But don't instantly click off or wipe this game from your memory, because there are some people who will really enjoy this game for what it is. I am just the polar opposite of that person. Now, I do think realistically it's going to be a very small percentage of console players who actually will connect well with this game, a very niche market, but a potential market all the same. Now, the gameplay you're seeing and will see isn't anything like what I usually post. That's usually highlights, streaks, or quick chronological kills, but Tannenberg doesn't play like that. It's a much slower, more methodical experience. So you're seeing essentially just chunks of the gameplay loop from the playing perspective as well as spectator mode. Okay, this is an edit. I mentioned spectator mode fully expecting to go back, get spectator footage and add it into this video afterwards, but it seems like on console spectator mode either isn't active yet or was removed, so I couldn't do that. So just ignore anything I say about spectator mode in the rest of the commentary, alright? There you go. To see what it's like for a vast amount of people to play at once. If it seems slow and boring to you, then that's an early indicator that you might not be the right kind of player for this game, as indeed I am not. But we must talk about the super obvious elephant in the room. Regardless of how you feel about this game, it must be acknowledged that it looks and indeed feels very dated. Chunky, clunky, jagged visuals, and a lack of animations, well, it's certainly no AAA gaming experience. This isn't COD, Battlefield, Destiny, Halo, or any other game of that stature. Tannenberg is developed and produced by Black Mill Games and M2H. They are not titans of this industry, and thus this game has much more of a budget or indie game feel to it. Some of you will really vibe with that, especially if you have experience of playing such games on PC, where there's a much greater abundance of them. So for you guys, possibly awesome. For a lot of other players, that's likely an early deal breaker. Now, take my opinion as just that, an opinion rather than fact, but for me, this feels like a game from 15 to 20 years ago in some ways. Or alternatively, it feels like an RPG such as Skyrim or Fallout, where to some degree the visuals and actual second-to-second gameplay are secondary to the overall storyline and wider perspective of events taking place. The problem being, in a game such as Tannenberg, the gameplay can't be secondary, it must be primary. So while this game may well fit well on PC, you could let me know. With mouse and keyboard and a familiarity with this type of game, on console I just don't feel it's anywhere near as welcome. I was bored of this game after less than an hour, and I only kept pushing because I realized the value of doing so. For those who think like me, this video will be very useful so you can save your money. And as for those who don't think anything like me, this video may well help you to decide to make a purchase you'll go on to thoroughly enjoy. Now, it is essentially essentially a hardcore experience. You generally get 1 or 2 shots for each death. There's minimal UI and actual feedback from the game, and so if you want a more authentic, let's say, experience in that kind of regard, this could be right up your alley. There's pretty heavy weapon sway on some guns, little indication of where you're being shot from most of the time. The minimap is very small if you don't enlarge it. All of the more game-centric elements are minimized. The chaos and overall confusion of war is evident. Now, whether that creates a fun and responsive gameplay experience is entirely up to you and what you're looking for. I didn't like it, clearly, for the record, but you might. So there are, I guess, 4 modes to choose from besides spectator mode, as you've been seeing, but besides that, the main large-scale mode for the footage today is Maneuver, which has 40 players, I believe. If you've played Conquest in Battlefield, then it will be somewhat familiar, but the map is divided into sections in a much more defined manner, and the individual locations function as spawn locations with specific bonuses for some of them. The idea being to control the majority of the map to reduce the enemy victory points to 0, or to be lower than your teams when the game timer runs out. The more of a majority you have, the faster their victory points diminish, that kind of idea. This also allows you to close off enemy spawn locations, and you can even end the game by capturing the enemy's headquarters, but only if you isolate it from the rest of the map. You'll be in squads doing this from different factions with different roles and with different weapons available to the factions. And all of this takes place on the Eastern Front, which basically provides you with all of the different maps. I really like the concept of all of this. Very well thought out, a twist on what a lot of people are going to be used to. I just wish it was in a different game that plays entirely differently. Then there's also Attrition, which is Team Deathmatch, Rifle Deathmatch, which is free for all, and a custom mode creator. As you can likely tell, Tannenberg has a real focus upon rifle gameplay. If something like Battlefield 1 bugged you because it didn't feel authentic due to too many automatic weapons, Tannenberg tries much harder to stick to that historically accurate feel. And that really is the selling point of this game. It isn't a flashy, highly polished game. It's also not arcadey or particularly pick up and play for most players. It's a hardcore, minimalistic, and authentic experience to a certain degree, and it is made for a specific audience. In a world where most developers are trying to just pull in any random casuals that they can. For this game, you have to fall right into the correct audience for a purchase to be in any way worthwhile. That is your warning from me. And if you want that experience, then you'll probably forgive the game for everything I'm about to list off that I didn't like. Because as it's my video, it's my coverage, it's only right that I tell you everything I thought so you're fully informed from my perspective. So for me, I got destroyed on this game for 2 reasons that I couldn't really affect, as well as just not being good at this totally new experience for me. But the first issue I couldn't affect was the lack of settings on console. This feels like, I'm not saying it is, but it feels like a PC game that's been ported over with very little focus upon quality of life improvements for console. Now, this game was released on PC first, so I'm only speculating about the second part, but I simply couldn't find sensitivity settings that felt comfortable, and there are no advanced settings that we find in some, admittedly usually more AAA games. For example, there are no dead zone settings for your sticks, which means you can't alter how much you have to move the stick before it reacts. And for someone who likes and is used to very responsive stick movement, this left me near incapable of aiming properly, as all of my muscle memory was fighting against what I needed to do. It felt truly awful, and so I know there's going to be others of you out there who would have the same experience, especially if you come from Battlefield and you have tweaked your dead zone settings, because it just makes it not fun to play for those players. And then throw in that there's no field of view scroller as well, so you're stuck with the default field of view. Then also, there was no controller setup that allowed players to crouch with the right stick. It was always mapped to the B or circle button. In 2020, I honestly just feel like that's inexcusable. You again just locked off a load of players who have got used to using their controller in a slightly different fashion via an extremely basic controller setting that's available on the vast majority of first-person shooters. So this hindered my performance even more. I couldn't aim properly and was constantly pressing the wrong buttons, largely due to a lack of basic setting options that could easily be avoided. When you combine that with the gunplay experience largely being about controlling sway, holding breath, being accurate, iron sights obscuring your view and such, and dealing with that, it left me feeling like I was literally fighting my weapon to aim at the target, frequently missing shots I'd hit with my eyes damn near closed on other games. Now, the second reason why I struggled struggled so much with this game is I got bored. And I guess you can't really say that's the game's fault as such, but the most effective way to play is to stick with your squad and fairly slowly move around the map. This is obvious, the same applies to nearly all squad-based shooters, but it was so slow that I basically had two choices, in my mind at least. Do that, stick with the squad, play slow, peek over the top of trenches, and actually do very little quite frequently, thus leaving me as a player the way I am, totally bored, or get out there a bit to try to end the boredom, but get shot from random places you can't see with very little feedback. As stated, this game simply isn't for me. So that was my experience. And for many of you, that's what you'd experience as well. But if you like the very regimented, methodical play, you'll probably adhere to it much more, be much more successful, and have a lot more fun. So to summarize, I hated this game. I don't think it's a good fit for console. To me, it screams of being a free-to-play title in how it feels. Yes, I had to pay about £15 for it, but for a very specific type of person, you'll love that it offers you something you probably can't easily find elsewhere, at least not on console. And it's probably a lot more fun playing in an organized fashion with your friends. Now, for most people, most groups of friends, I'd simply say, is there not just a much better game you could play together in that manner? But for a few of you, I hope you have an awesome time, and that is my review of Tannenberg Eastern Front on console. Let me know what you think of it and whether you've played it. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new or haven't done so before, if you want to help me hit 50k, and stay up to date with all of my content. And all of the links to my social media, including Patreon, can be found in the description and my pinned comment, where if you do support me, you'll join the board of awesome you're seeing right here with all of the epic people that already support me on Patreon. They're all absolute heroes, and I love them all deeply and, of course, often. So yep, all the links to that in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I am Get Good Guy, and I'll see you next time. Laters. Which was fantastic, because that would have kind of ruined the whole thing about the weapon. If you could just run around with it and one shot anywhere, it would have 1, probably completely broken the game, 2, wouldn't have been anywhere near as satisfying, and 3,